think we'll start with our first speaker this evening, and that is Kristina Poznan. She's going to speak on living in 1776. Some people think that I already know all about that, having lived live, but that's not quite the case. Anyway, she's a Vassar and William and Mary graduate, currently working in digital publications at Matrix, Center for Digital Humanities and Social Sciences at Michigan State University. She has taught history at LaSalle University and New Mexico University. Tonight, Kristina will explore what we can learn from daily life in the 1770s and during the American Revolution, bringing in related insights from her work as a historian and history educator. And on a local note, Kristina serves as the CVEF Communications Committee and manages our social media challenges. Please join me in welcoming Kristina to the stage.
Thank you. Is this a good volume?
Yes.
All right. I'm here today to talk a bit about living in 1776. Not as much about the Revolution per se, and not entirely about Durham specifically, or Middlefield, but to set the scene for the next two talks a bit by giving us a glimpse of everyday life 250 years ago. History, we know, is all around us. Those of us lucky enough to talk to you tonight, the historically inclined, perhaps live it a little bit more deeply than the average person. I grew up mostly in Fairfield, which had the special distinction, alongside Norwalk, of being burned by the British in 1779. Our house, unknown to me at the time, was a half-mile from the Gold Selleck-Silliman House, one of the local revolutionary leaders who earlier that year was captured by the British for ransom. You can learn all about it in the 1993 feature film Mary Silliman's War, which is in fact quite good. The outbuilding behind it is also among the few known slave quarters still standing in Connecticut. I went to graduate school at William and Mary, where some of you may know it is the 1770s every single day. Parts of the university's campus date to 1699, with many buildings alongside the historic Duke of Gloucester Street completed in subsequent decades. What you see there today is a mix of original buildings and painstakingly accurate recreations dating from the 1930s. I'm especially partial to the Triswell Bucktrout House, home first to a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, later a local cabinet maker, and also the site of my husband's and my wedding, after we had already moved away to New Mexico. It's a strange experience at times living adjacent to the 1770s for years and years. You become accustomed to things like daily cannon fire. Our border collie loved the sheep paddocks but never came around to the fife and drum corps. Her daily walks in the historic area would start at the Powder Magazine, pass by the historic blacksmith, pewtersmith, wig maker, bookbinder, mantua maker, seamstress for women's gowns, the Raleigh Tavern Bakery, the Charlton Coffee House, before looping around the Colonial Capitol building and back again. We got used to things like seeing colonial interpreters busting out their cell phones once they reached the employee parking lots, driving off in, well, regular cars, and grabbing coffee at our rather colonial-looking Wawa. In addition to these hyper-local historical treasures, renting a rickety house literally adjacent to the Colonial Williamsburg golf course, I also had the dubious honor of driving lots of teenagers around in 12-passenger vans to visit more historic sites in a 90-minute radius for field trip-based summer school. Places like Jamestown, St. John's Church in Richmond, where Patrick Henry gave the fire "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, and Yorktown, where the Revolution ended. It's all rather idyllic today, though the reality in the 1770s, in Virginia and New England alike, was considerably less pleasant and more smelly. Life in the 1770s, even before the outbreak of war, was hard. Most of us would have been farmers, Roughly 1/6 of harvests failed. We'd have a much shorter life expectancy, ridden with a variety of diseases. If the illnesses didn't kill you, the cure might, as these included mercury pills and powdered excrement. Many of us women would have died in childbirth. Giving birth, we'd be attended not yet by a doctor, but by a midwife. 130 out of every 1,000 babies wouldn't have made it to their first birthday, in contrast to around 7 today. Midwives were often asked to pressure young unwed mothers into naming the father of their child in the throes of labor. We women would have almost no legal rights. Under the principle of femme covert, the wife is, quote, covered by the husband. But in terms of the American Revolution, women were the backbone of the non-importation and non-consumption movements, leaning in to make homespun fabrics, giving up tea, which, by the way, came not in loose leaves, but instead in compressed bricks that were grated. Gives you a little different view of the Boston Tea Party, and taking care of farms and businesses while men were away fighting the war. Many of us would have started our lives as Congregationalists, worshiping not in the current building or current location of the United Churches of Durham, but several iterations of meeting houses ago, as such buildings throughout the state frequently suffered from fires or benefited from upgrades. It might have looked like this early example from 1772 in Maine. Maybe less like this one from 1770 in Canterbury, which was renovated 40 years later in the Greek Revival style and rotated so that the front was on a different side. The Great Awakening brought the famed Methodist missionary George Whitefield to Middletown in 1740, preaching not conversion to Methodism specifically, but a more intensely personal and emotional brand of Protestantism centered on salvation through the grace of God. Politically, in the early days of the American Revolution, we might be raising a toast to celebrate the Boston Tea Party and another 10 seconds later to the health of the king, considering at first the British Parliament, not the British monarchy, to which we still considered ourselves loyal subjects, to be the enemy and the perpetrator of injustice. This only changes in like 1775. We'd likely consider folks from other colonies with suspicion, not neighboring colonial brothers. Here in Connecticut, we had more in common with several Caribbean islands with which we did shipping business, more so than, say, North Carolina or Georgia. Indeed, the roads were quite shitty and difficult to travel, with the exception of only the post road along the coast. Traveling by boat rather than overland really was the way to go. Many goods, even those produced in other British colonies here, we would have procured not directly from their ports, but instead via England. Cloth, iron, glass, crockery, East Indian silk, tea, and spices. If we were literate, as a considerable percentage of us in New England were, alongside the Bible and newspapers, we might be devouring Thomas Paine's Common Sense, out just at the beginning of that year. There is something absurd, Paine wrote, in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. By candlelight, likely made of whale oil, we might read novels, a relatively new genre in the 1740s, like Clarissa and Pamela, which instructed women in virtue, and were written, of course, by men. Our manners might be rather crude. A young George Washington instructed himself in the, quote, rules of civility to learn all sorts of tips for passing in polite society. Kill no vermin as fleas, lice, ticks, etc. in the sight of others. Put not your meat to your mouth with your knife. He warns us not to spit forth the stone of any fruit pie upon a dish. Folks needed manners for all sorts of things that we rarely need them for anymore, like sharing a bed with strangers at a hotel. In 1776, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams spent a night sharing a bed at the Indian Queen Tavern in New Brunswick, New Jersey. They spent the night largely bickering over whether to keep the window open or closed. There might even be slaveholders among us. Even more so in Fairfield, which had roughly 800 enslaved people at the time of the Revolution, the highest in the colony. Middletown, by contrast, had 200 enslaved people. The Revolution becomes a path to freedom for some enslaved men in Connecticut who are granted it as a condition of enlistment. We might encounter local Wagunk Indians in the area as late as the 1760s, though primarily adjacent to the river, as the New England colonists here were by no means the first human inhabitants of the area. By 1760, most of the remaining Wagungs, weary of Middletown's rapid expansion, had removed to Farmington and Mohegan, later accepting lands on a joint reservation in upstate New York in the 1770s, though many became refugees for a time in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, during the American Revolution itself. My time is quickly running out, but I hope this gets us more in the 1770s mood for our next two speakers. Thank you.